How the heck do I make my RAG AI agents more accurate? This is a question that you have 100% asked yourself if you spent any time at all building RAG systems. And the answer that I propose for this question is GraphRAG. Now, what is GraphRAG? Well, you know how traditional or naive RAG works, right? You have your documents, it gets chunked up, it goes into embedding, and goes into a vector database, right? Well, GraphRAG takes it a step further where we aren't just using a vector database, we're using a knowledge graph. And that knowledge graph is essentially taking that vector database, but defining the relationships between each vector. And why do we care about that? Well, because it gives us more accurate answers, which solves our problem in part of how do we make RAG systems that actually work? And yet finding information about how to integrate GraphRAG into AI agents on platforms like n8n is really hard to find. So in this video, I'm going to pull back the curtain on all this. I'm going to show you how GraphRAG works, how we integrate it to n8n, and how we can actually make this production ready. And with that, let's jump into it. Okay, so this is how the rest of the video is going to go. First, I'm going to talk about kind of how RAG works. What's naive RAG? What's traditional RAG? What's GraphRAG? What's going on under the hood, right? It's really important you understand this. Next, we're going to actually create our GraphRAG system. So we're going to be using LightRAG in this instance. LightRAG is open source. It allows us to self-host it anywhere. You can even locally host it. In this video, we're going to use render because it's really quick, really simple to demo. Lastly, we're going to go inside of n8n and connect all those dots. So that's how it's going to work. And let's start with the explanations. So first, naive RAG. This is traditional RAG. This is all the RAG that you see on YouTube with n8n creators, right? Where they're using Supabase or Pinecone, they're putting some sort of documents into it, and then it's vectorizing it, and then they ask questions about what's in the vector database. So how does that work? A quick review. Over here on the left, what do we have? We have all of our documents, right? These are all the documents we're going to put into our vector database. Each document is then chunked, right? If I have a 100-page document, it doesn't just put it all in as a 100-page document into the vector database. It becomes like 1,000, 10,000 different chunks, right? This just makes it smaller and easier for the large language model to find what it needs to answer your questions. And the way that actually works is each chunk becomes an embedding, right? So chunk 3, for example, becomes this embedding up here. And each embedding is just a bunch of numbers, right? Here it just shows 3. It could be 10, 20, 30, a billion numbers, right, in theory. But it's just taking that chunk and turning it into some sort of mathematical figure. From there, the embeddings go into the vector database. So in this case, this embedding that was chunk 3 became this blue embedding right here, which is represented by man. Now, pretend it says chunk 3 instead. So it goes in the vector here. This could be vector 2, this could be vector 1, this could be vector 4, right? You kind of see what's happening here. It's taking the chunks and it's putting it onto a graph, right? In this case, it's a 3-dimensional graph. In reality, it's hundreds of dimensions. Now, when I go to my AI agent and I ask it a question and I say, hey, tell me, about, let's say, Q4's 2023 financial review. Well, what happens is that question, that query also becomes an embedding, which gets sent to the vector database. And then AI says, which embedding is that question closest to? In this case, it would be closest to this one, right? This vector up here. Imagine this says chunk 3. My question had to do with Q4 financial data, which was in chunk 3. So it would go right here. Like, all right, that's the vector that it's closest to. Let's grab that. And in fact, it might grab 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other chunks that are close to that embedding. And then it takes that embedding and takes all those embeddings, right? All those different vectors it found, gives it to AI, which then gives you your answer, right? That's RAG. It retrieves the vectors, it augments that information to its answer, then generates you an answer. That's how vector databases work. That's how traditional naive RAG works. And sometimes we put a spin on it, we put a re-ranker, right? We give it some bells and whistles, but that's how it works traditionally. Now, as an analogy, think of it as a library, okay? Each book is a vector, each vector is a chunk, and the AI in this case is a librarian. You're asking it, hey, tell me about Q4 financial data, and they're going to say, which book is closest to Q4 financial data, and it's going to bring it to you. Traditional RAG. So now let's talk about GraphRAG. Has a lot of similarities. We still chunk, we still embed, we still vectorize. But in parallel, at the same time, we are doing entity and relationship extraction. So as it's chunking up those documents and looking at what's inside, it's defining what are the entities in this document, what are the relationships between entities, and then it's usually pulling those as triplets, right? So for example, like this one right here. This chunk right here, you see we have a number of attendees. Each attendee is going to be considered an entity, right? And there's a relationship between all these different entities. One, they're all in this board meeting. Two, they all probably talked about the key agenda items. But you can see like there's a bunch of relationships you could pull just from the singular page. And the way it often pulls them is something akin to this, right? We have the entity, which is Sarah Chen. We have the relationship. She is the CEO of Chase AI, and that's usually pulled as a triplet, which would be Sarah is CEO of Chase AI, subject, predicate, object. And it does this over and over and over as it goes through the document. And as it does this, it creates nodes and it creates edges. The entities become nodes and the relationships become edges. And so what does GraphRAG do with all that information? Well, it creates what you see here, and that's a knowledge graph. So these circles, right? Alex Harrison, for example, that is an entity, aka a node. And the connections you see between the different circles, the dots, the nodes, those are edges, those are the relationships between them. So that's what it builds. And so it's kind of simplistic, but imagine if we got rid of all those connections. Think of that as vectors, think of that as just a vector database. And with a GraphRAG, we're now making connections between them, which allows the AI to give us more insight when we actually ask it questions. And so all of that leads to this, which is increased performance. Now, this graph comes from LightRAG, so it shows them just killing it. They're even whooping Microsoft's GraphRAG, which is a pretty robust GraphRAG system. But big picture, what are we seeing here? We're just seeing better performance, right? We are getting something tangible from these relationships that are built, and that's better accuracy. But this performance does come at a cost. Literally, it will cost you more money to run GraphRAG systems, right? We get the pros, answer depth, accuracy, context. It's a better product. But in terms of cost, it's there. For example, I shoved in all of the Lord of the Rings, like all 3 books, which comes out to like a 1,200 page PDF. That cost me from embeddings alone about $8. And that was using GPT-5 Nano. So that's a very cheap model and it's pretty fast. But in terms of speed, it also took it about an hour and a half to do that. So 1,200 pages becomes $8 and an hour and a half of your time. Understand that going in. All right, that's enough theory. Let's actually build something finally. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into render and we're going to build our server where we are going to host LightRAG, which will be our RAG ecosystem. All right, you're going to head to render.com and you're going to create an account. Then you're going to go to dashboard. You're going to go to web service. And then this is where we are going to give it the LightRAG image. So you're going to go to existing image. All right, now we need to give it the latest Docker image for LightRAG. And you can get that from here, which is on their GitHub. I have a link to it down below. So you're just going to copy this. So it's just Docker pull, and then it's the image URL. And then we're pasting that in here. Now we're going to do connect. And essentially what that's going to do is it's going to take everything we need to get our LightRAG server up and running, and it's giving it to render. So once we spin this up, it's all set and ready to go. But there are a few settings we are going to have to change down below. So for the name, I'm just going to call it LR test. Don't need to do anything for the project. For the region, just do what's closest to you. Now, you need to at least do the starter plan, because if you do the free plan, it's just not going to be enough power for it to work. You can try it on the free plan, but you'll probably run into issues. Starter at the minimum. And then also this becomes a thing of scale, right? Let's say you're working with a client that has thousands and thousands of documents. You're probably going to need something a little bigger than starter, maybe standard, maybe pro, maybe look into local hosting options. Remember, LightRAG is open source, so you have every option under the sun when it comes to putting it somewhere to go to work. So just understand when you're using this in production or in particular use cases, something like the starter may or may not be enough. But for today, it will be. So again, at least do the $7 a month. All right, then down here we have environmental variables. These are essentially the settings for our server. So this is where we're going to put our API keys for the large language model that it's going to use. This is where we do the embedding settings. This is where we do the re-ranking settings, right? There's actually a lot of settings we need to change, which makes this section a little bit painful, but it's going to take us about 5 minutes, maybe 10 if you're slow, but you'll need to do it once. So what environmental variables do we need to put? Where do we get this information? Well, we're going to go back to their GitHub. So I'm in here, I click back up on LightRAG, and we see all this stuff, right? You feel free to play around here. LightRAG actually has a ton of information on their GitHub page, but what we are looking for is the env.example. And so what we see here is this is all the settings we are able to play around with inside our server. Quite a few, right? 303 lines. Now there's 5 things we need to change. Well, 5 sections, and each section has a couple parts. We're going to need to change first the user settings, right? So we can actually log into this thing. So to do that, we're going to scroll back up to the top. And what we're looking for is this auth accounts and token secret. So line 44 and 45, I want you to copy this, just highlight and copy those two parts. Go back into render and then go to add from .env. From there, I want you to paste it. We need to get rid of these hashtags. That would comment it out. So you get rid of those hashtags, and then you need to put in your auth account information. So it's going to be username, password. So it could be Chase, password. Obviously, do something better than that. Same thing with your token secret. Call it something. Password. I'll be deleting all this later, so don't worry. So add variables. We've added those too. Now we're going to repeat this process for the rest of the stuff we need to do. All right, next one we need is the API key. So line 51, copy that. Add from environment, or if you're just doing one at a time, you can also just do add environment variable, right? I paste that in there, and then I put in my password. Next, now let's do the re-ranker. So we're going to copy all of this, lines 77 through 84, go to add from env, paste it in there, and then get rid of all the text ones. So the first two lines, get rid of that. Get rid of the pound. Boom, boom, boom. Whoops. Don't delete any important stuff. And it should look like this. So there should be 5 things: enable re-rank, min re-rank, re-rank model, re-rank binding host, and re-rank binding API key. So what are we going to use for our re-ranker? Well, we are going to be using Cohere. Now, we've used Cohere in previous videos when we do RAG. So you're just going to go cohere.com. You're going to sign in. You're going to have to add some sort of billing. Very, very cheap, right? Each time we use our RAG system, you're fractions of a penny. So just give them a couple bucks. But you're going to sign in. And then once you're inside, you're going to go to the left, go to API keys. And you're going to create a new production key. So I'm going to call this test2, generate production key. Copy this. Don't worry, I'll delete mine later. Go back into render. And then where it says API key, paste that in there. Now for the host, it's going to be https://api.cohere.com/v2/re-rank. Then the model is Cohere-v3.5. So this is what yours should look like if you're using Cohere, which I recommend. All right, so now let's do the large language model. So I want you to do lines 122 through 125. Copy that, back to render, add from env, paste it in. So we're going to use OpenAI. We're going to do GPT-5. So GPT-5-nano. This is a small model, it's fast, and that's what we want. Right? Binding host, you can remain the same, but now you need to go get your OpenAI API key. Now, I'm going to assume you've done something like this before, but in case you haven't, just Google OpenAI API. It's going to get you to somewhere right here. You're then going to create an account. You're going to come up to the right where it says settings, right? You're going to go to billing, and you're going to add some funds. After you add some funds, again, 5, 10, 15 bucks, go down to API keys, create a new API key, and have this page open because we're going to come to it again. So copy that, back into render, paste it in there, right? So OpenAI GPT-5 Nano, keep that the same, put in your key, add variables. Sweet. Couple more to go and we're almost done. All right, next is embedding. So this is lines 169 through 173. So copy that into render, add from env, paste it in there. Now, first thing, the API key. Remember I told you to keep it up. Copy it, back to render, paste it in. Now, we don't want to do embedding 3 large. We want to do embedding 3 small. The embedding dim or dimensions is going to be 1536. And I almost forgot, make sure you delete out the comments. So should look like this. OpenAI text embedding 3 small, 1536, keep the same host and put in your API key, add the variables. There we go. All right, we have one last thing we need to do because I overlooked it before. I want you to go to lines 106 through 112 and copy that. Add from env. Open this up. Again, let's get rid of some of this. Don't need that. Don't need that. Don't need that. So should look like this. And then from the top, we're going to change these to 12, 3, 24, and 100. Now, these are going to be a function of the power of the server you're running on. So These aren't always going to be exactly the same. If you're doing something stronger, you can bump it up, or if you're doing something smaller, you can bump it down. Feel free to play with these numbers, but start with there and add the variables, and we're done. All right, we're done playing with the variables. Now go to advanced and go to add disk, and here you're going to do /app/data. Then all I want to do is to deploy the web service, and it's going to get up and running. Now, once your project's up and running from the dashboard, it will look like this: project name and a green check mark. And then once inside the project, you'll see a link to where you can get to it from here, right? You'll see this link. I click on it, and from there, it will bring you to your actual LightRAG instance. And then so you're just going to use the username and password that we set in our environment variables, whatever that is. All right, and like that, you have your LightRAG server up and running. So this is mine. I already have some documents inside of it, but let me give you the lay of the land real quick. So we're on the documents page, which shows everything we've given it, right? Gives you the status, the name, the length, the chunks, all that good stuff. You have processing, pending, failed, and completed, pretty self-explanatory. We have a pipeline status, which will show you what's going on with your latest documents or what's happening at that current time. Up top, we have the knowledge graph. And so this is the actual knowledge graph that I was talking about before, right? This shows us all our entities and all our relationships. As I look at this knowledge graph, I can click on different ones, and you'll see some stuff here on the right. So I have like the ID, the labels, how far away it is from our center node. And then I'll see things like description, right? The name, the type, the sources. So what is the actual source document that we found this entity? And then the actual chunk. And then below, we can actually see the different relations. So all the other nodes it's directly connected with. Now we're on the retrieval page, and this is where you can actually query your RAG database. So I can ask it questions like I did up here, and it'll give me a full-blown response, including references. Over here on the right, we have our parameters. Query mode are the different types of essentially retrieval it's using. So we have naive, which is what we talked about before, right? Where it just goes to the vectors itself and just picks like the closest sounding book. And then we have mix. So mix is essentially a mix of traditional and GraphRAG. So it will start its search semantically. So to figure out where it needs to go on this knowledge graph, it first does semantic search, right? It goes to the library and it asks which book is the most similar, right? And then that will get it to a certain node. And from there, it will then traverse the nodes to get the answer it wants, right? This helps it be a little bit quicker. Next, we have things like response format. You don't need to play around with the top K or the chunk K. What you do want to pay attention to is the max total tokens, because this can be a token heavy task. So you probably want to keep max tokens at a reasonable amount. 32K to start, I think, is good, because if you just let that run wild, they can like really burn through them. And then you always want to make sure you enable re-rank and stream response. But feel free to play around with it here. Lastly, we have our API page, and you're going to get pretty familiar with this one because we're going to need everything in here to connect this bad boy to n8n, right? So we'll dive into this in a little bit, but this is where we're going to get all our information about like, what should those HTTP requests actually look like? Well, we just come here and we're going to get curls, and then we're going to import that into n8n. All right, so before we jump into n8n and connect to all this, what I want to do is test it out first. So I want you to find some documents that you want to test with this RAG system. It can be 2 documents, 3 documents, 10 documents, whatever. Go ahead, go to upload, and just dunk them in. Make sure they're text documents, so text, markdown, docx, even PDF is fine. Just don't have it just be straight images, because it does need to extract the text. And then the more documents you put in there, the longer it's going to take, but hey, that's just part of the game with GraphRAG. I uploaded 13 documents corresponding to 13 different meeting notes for my company, Chase AI. They're fake documents. They tell a fake story about this company going through all these different funding rounds, okay? And so once you do that and you upload them, I want you to go to retrieval. Let's clear all this. And I want you to ask it some questions. And I want you to ask it questions that aren't just basic, like frequently asked questions things, right? Like, don't just ask like, what was revenue for this month? Right? Like something that's clearly stated there. No, I want you to ask it questions that sort of have something to do with the relationships between all these documents, right? Because we're doing a knowledge graph. We're going a step further than just basic traditional RAG. Put it through the paces and see how it does. So the question I'm going to ask it is, map how the executive team structure changed throughout 2024 and how these changes influenced major strategic decisions. Right? That's not a simple FAQ question. It actually needs to do some thinking and tie multiple documents together. All right, so here's the response it gave me. It kind of breaks it up into 3 parts. The first part, it gives me an overview of the executive changes, right? Like, so like, what are the facts? What happened? What did it find inside the documents, right? And it also sources it throughout. Next, it goes into the part we care about, which is like, how did this influence major decisions? This takes a little bit of like nuance, and thinking. And this is where we really make our money when it comes to GraphRAG. And then lastly, it gives us a summary. Love it, gives me all the references. This is exactly where GraphRAG excels, taking this disparate information, finding the relationships, and then giving me insights that I can actually use. Now let's go into the last part of this video and show you how you can actually put all this inside of an n8n AI agent ecosystem. Okay, so here we are inside of n8n, and we have this system broken up into 3 parts. First is the AI agent piece, and this is obviously very simple. We just have our chat message trigger alongside an HTTP request to our LightRAG system so it can answer whatever questions we give it. Now, obviously, you could add more tools here. You can integrate this however you want. This is just a skeleton for you to improve as you wish. Next is the data pipeline piece, and this is how we actually get documents ingested into our LightRAG system without having to go to LightRAG and manually put documents inside it one by one. That's not realistic. That's not production level. Instead, what we're doing is we have it hooked up to our Google Drive. And so we're going to have a folder inside of our Google Drive where every time you put a document inside of that folder, it's going to automatically get sent to LightRAG, vectorized, and put into the knowledge graph. This can handle multiple documents at once, and LightRAG automatically makes sure no duplicates get sent over. Last is our data cleanup piece. And so what do we do when we don't have documents we want to use anymore? Well, you don't need to go to LightRAG and do it one by one. Instead, just go to your Google Drive, delete it, and whenever this runs, it's going to automatically figure out which documents are orphaned inside of LightRAG, aka what's inside of LightRAG that's not inside of Google Drive. Well, it's going to identify those and delete them so your Google Drive and LightRAG are always synced. Now, you obviously don't want to build out this whole template by hand, so I'm giving you the template for free. Down below is my Skool. It's totally free. Just go there, sign up, go to the GraphRAG lesson, and download the template. That's simple, and you're going to have this completely built out for you. You're just going to have to go through each module and update it with your information. And I'm going to show you which ones you need to update and how that works. So if you haven't done that already, pause the video, go do that. That way you can follow along for the rest of the video and it'll be as painless as possible for you. All right, once you download and then upload that template, first place we're going to go to is the GraphRAG module. Now, this is the module that's used to send the query to our LightRAG server so we can get the answers about our RAG questions. Now, what do you need to change? What do you need to update? Well, what you need to change is the URL, right? And what you also need to change is your API key. So this API key is whatever you put inside that environmental variable for API keys, right? Remember when we were spinning up that render server? Down here is what we actually pass. So we pass the query, which is mapped to the chat input. So whatever I tell the AI agent, that's what's the value that's put here. So you can see I sent it a question earlier. You know, the same one I did before, map how the executive team structure changed, right? Mode is mixed. You don't need to change that. Now, how do I find my URL? Well, I want you to go back to LightRAG. You're going to come here to the API page. You're going to go to authorize. And then down here under API key header, there should be an option for you to fill out that value with your key. Fill it out, enter it, and you're good. Now, we need to go to query. And so you'll see query text, click that. And then if you go down to execute and click that, you'll see this where it says curl, and you're just going to copy this. This is your URL. Now I could also copy this whole curl, go back into here, do import curl, and it would fill it all out for me too, right? That's how I created these HTTP modules, but they're already filled out for you. So all you need to do is paste in that new URL. And it's that simple, right? For my chat model, I'm just using 5.1 nano, right? Nothing super powerful because your AI agent in this case, in this RAG system is really just a courier, right? It's just taking your message and giving it to the RAG system and doing the same thing back. Now, this is a simple system with just one tool, which is the GraphRAG, but we could easily fill this up with more and more RAG tools, okay? AI agent, the system message for this is also very simple. And I'm just telling it, hey, route your question to the GraphRAG tool with a single call, and then return the exact same response. You will need to edit this as you see fit, depending on the sophistication of your AI agent using this GraphRAG. If I open the chat, you can also see the answer it gave to me down below, right? Again, pretty much the exact same answer we got before when we were inside LightRAG itself. So once you do that, I want you to test this thing out. Open up the chat message and start peppering it with questions and see how it responds. Compare it to how it responds when it's on the LightRAG server itself. It should be the exact same answers. And with that, you have an AI agent that now has GraphRAG as a tool. It's really that easy, right? The things that can be kind of hard are these data pipeline stuff. And like I said, I've already filled this all out for you, right? All you have to do is connect your Google accounts and update this right here. So what are you going to update here? Well, inside here, you're going to update your URL. Now, how are you going to get that? You should know how to do that by now. You're going to go back to LightRAG. You're just going to go to this Get Documents page right here. You're going to go to Execute. You're going to scroll down to the curl section, and you're going to copy paste the URL. And if you need any hints, it should be the same URL that you use to actually go onto your LightRAG server, followed by /documents/upload. Again, just update the API key here, and then all this stuff will remain the same. n8n binary file, data. Shouldn't have to touch that. So what do you need to update for the Google stuff? Well, all you need to update for these three things is the query string, right? The query string where your folder is. So let's talk about this real quick. I want you to go to Google Drive, and you'll see here I have a folder named LightRAG demo. This is what essentially acts as my staging area for all the documents that I want to go into my RAG system. So the way it works is these get put into my folder, and when those documents hit that folder, it sets off these triggers. It then loops through all the documents, it downloads the files, and then it uploads it to LightRAG. Now, what you need to update is this. So you need to go to the folder that you end up creating and map it accordingly. Do it for that one, do it for this one, turn these on once you're ready. And then you have this one in the middle here, the search files and folders. This one is not a trigger. So you need to actually input the folder ID. Now, where do you get the folder ID? Well, if you go inside of Google Drive, you go back to your folder, you see this in the URL at the top of the screen. After drive/folders/, there's a bunch of numbers and letters before it hits a question mark. I want you to copy all those numbers and letters prior to the question mark, because that is the folder ID. And I want you to paste it into here. Now, why do I have this in here at all if we have these triggers? Well, let's talk about this annoying Googleism. So Google only recognizes a file being created or updated if I take that file from outside of Google Drive and put it into that folder. So you see how this is a file, and you see how this is all part of a drive? If I take this and I put it into that same folder, Google trigger won't go off because it's like, that's not a new file. It hasn't been created. It hasn't been updated. It sees it as just like one big folder like your drive. So that can be annoying. And because it's annoying, I have this. And you run this, if you have documents already in a folder that you want now to go to LightRAG, this will get those. Now, the reason I have this here is mostly for clients, because if you're doing client work with RAG and they tell you, hey, I have all my documents ready. I have 10,000 documents in one folder. They're ready to go. You can't tell them, Google's annoying. Go ahead and take all those documents out and then put them back in so it triggers. No, you can't do that. So we do this instead. It's just going to be a manual trigger. So if you already have a folder you want to use with documents inside of it, you click it, it runs, you're all set. And then from there, after that initial ingestion, you have these triggers ready to go. If all that confused you, just update it like I told you and you'll be fine. Lastly, data cleanup. This just makes sure whatever I delete in Google Drive gets deleted in LightRAG automatically. What do you need to update? What do you need to change? Well, for the file IDs, guess what you have to update? The file ID. Just put that in there, right? Next, you need to update this and this. This is where we get the LightRAG docs, and then this is where we delete the LightRAG docs. So you should kind of understand how this is going to work now. What am I going to tell you to do? Go to LightRAG, go to the API section, execute it to get the URL. But I'll show you just in case you forgot. So inside of here, it's going to be your URL/documents, and then your API key. For delete, it's going to be your URL/documents/delete_document. Again, you can find that all on here. And then down here in the expression, we're just mapping the JSON ID. So that gets identified via this code block. And this code block is what's doing the logic to identify, all right, what's in Drive and what's in LightRAG and what are we missing here? So again, all done for you. And that's it, guys. That's the video. That's how you're able to create a GraphRAG system using LightRAG on a self-hosted server and connect it to n8n so you can use AI agents that are way more effective. You also have a data pipeline, so you can actually do this all from one place inside of Google Drive. And we have a data cleanup section, so you can keep everything in sync, which is really, really important, right? We don't want redundant or bad data inside of our graph. So here are my final thoughts on all this. GraphRAG is awesome. It's very accurate, but it can be a little slow and it can be a little cost intensive, right? So this is just another tool in your RAG toolkit. Treat it as such. This is not always the answer. As much as I've talked about how good it is and the accuracy benefits, sometimes it's overkill, right? If you're working with a data set or you're working with a client where they're just asking you to create a glorified FAQ page, it might make more sense to just go the traditional route, right? It's quicker, it's cheaper, and the questions that are being asked are really, really straightforward. right? So that might be the place for traditional RAG. But if you're doing something that requires insight and relationships and figuring out how thing A connects with thing B and like how it also affects thing C, this is where GraphRAG shines. And this is why you need it in those situations, because traditional RAG does not cut it. So that gives us traditional RAG for simple stuff. That gives us GraphRAG for more complex relationship stuff. What about RAG? What about systems where I'm dealing with huge tables and Excel files and CSV files, right? How do we fit that into here? Does that fit here? Is that traditional? Well, that's in a future lesson. And that's something entirely different. And that's agentic RAG that uses stuff like SQL. Okay. That's super important. That's going to be our third tool in our RAG toolbox. So stick around because that will be dropping soon as well. And as always, let me know what you thought of this. Let me know in the comments if you ran into any issues. Make sure to check out the Skool, and I'll see you around.